So, why don't you fix one of these cars?
Oh my god, you're a genius. I mean, the whole time, why on earth hadn't I thought about fixing one of these cars?
Okay, don't be a dick.
Their tires are rotted and their batteries are dead.
Are you done?
Can't even begin to think what the inside of the engine blocks look like. Only ones making new car batteries are the military.
So, does that mean there will be no vehicles in The Last of Us Part 2? Hey everyone, my name is TheiPadCat, and in today's video we're talking about vehicles in The Last of Us Part 2. Will they even be in it? What sort of vehicles could we see? And how could it work within the story/lore? Thanks a lot to Nick, who's a subscriber to this channel and a member of the TheiPadCat Discord server, for this video idea. If you yourself want to suggest video ideas, chat with me, other like-minded The Last of Us fans, or join me and other subscribers of the channel when I stream The Last of Us' multiplayer, which should hopefully begin soon, join through the link in the description. But with that out of the way, let's get started. First off, let's start by making it clear what I mean in this video when I say vehicle. I don't mean car specifically. No, I mean anything we can use to travel without walking or running ourselves, i.e. horses, boats, cars, etc. In the first game we did a lot of walking, and only at 2 points in the story did we use vehicles. When leaving Bill's town and heading to Pittsburgh, we had the pickup, and when we left looking for Ellie at Tommy's Dam and later traveling to the university and then finally to Lakeside, we had Callus, or the horse. Realistically speaking, unless Jackson has some private oil refinery, or that all cars run on diesel or electricity, we shouldn't be seeing cars at all. Since gasoline typically has gone bad long before the 25 years that has passed since most gas was manufactured in The Last of Us' universe. But as I've talked about earlier, The Last of Us doesn't have to be realistic for it to be immersive, just convincing. And I'm not really a science guy, so that won't really bother me. But let's move on to list all vehicles we know have been used post-outbreak, not just by us the player, and pick out the ones that we could see used and perhaps use ourselves in part 2. So here goes. Military APCs, both armed with machine guns and without them. Military transport trucks, pickups, boats, horses, regular cars, and helicopters. So I think it's very likely we see both military APCs and transport trucks. Technically we've already seen an APC in the gameplay demo, but it was long since abandoned. But even if we don't see the military in person, so to speak, which I do think we will, I think we'll see these two vehicles, simply because they're too useful for other factions not to use. We saw that the hunters in Pittsburgh used an APC with the machine gun turret they stole from the military after their rebellion. I could imagine bigger factions such as the Fireflies and maybe the Seraphites using those military transport trucks for bringing people to and from different outposts and such. However, I don't think we, the player, will get to use these vehicles, since there's no reason for 1 or 2 people to do so when more convenient ones could be used. A pickup or a regular car is probably, along with the horses, the most likely vehicles we'll get to see and use in part 2. But I'll talk more about those in a second. A boat could also be possible for us to use. I think more so than the military vehicles, but we'll get into that in a moment. Finally, we have helicopters. We only really know of one helicopter that was used post-outbreak, and that is the one we find crashed into the roof of the Colorado Mountain Plaza in Left Behind. It was a medical, military helicopter from the Denver quarantine zone, and if we do get to see a helicopter in part 2, which is a big if, it would with almost 100% certainty be used by the military. They are really the only ones I could imagine, at least out of the factions we know a lot about from The Last of Us Part 1, to have the resources to use a helicopter after the world has collapsed. It is also possible that the Seraphites could have one, although it is unlikely. Maybe they could have one reserved for their leader or prophet or whatever, like the president of the New California Republic in New Vegas had his own personal vertibird. but I find that very unlikely. Anyways, now we're left with vehicles that I think we, the players, could use in part 2. How could they fit into the story? Well, we know that cars are a rare commodity, as Bill states when he says most cars are just unusable, and the only people who manufacture new, at least new batteries, are the military. And seeing as Tommy's people predominantly seem to be using horses, how likely is it really that we get to see cars in part 2? Well, when we first arrive at the gates to Tommy's dam, we can actually see tire tracks, indicating that they do have cars. And the fact that we see that the dam was at some point controlled by Fedra probably means that they also left some vehicles that the people in Jackson now use. Also, Jackson is a town full of people. Some of them probably came there by car. So yes, even though cars are in very short supply in The Last of Us, I think it is very possible we do see them in part 2. And it makes sense through the story, as the people of Jackson almost certainly have some. As for what their role in the story could be, we know that Neil has referred to the story sometimes as Ellie's travels. And the fact that we know that the game both takes place in Wyoming and in Washington both could be indicators we use the car/cars to travel to different destinations. Of course, we couldn't drive the entire real distance between those places in the game, because it would be terribly boring and take very long and probably be impossible for Naughty Dog to even make it happen. No, it could probably be like in Uncharted 4, where we, through the story, use the car/jeep to travel out of the city and out on the savannah to then have a semi-open place where we drive around. Maybe it could work the same when we travel to Seattle. This is also supported by the fact that we know The Last of Us Part 2 will have more open areas, as confirmed during the E3 panel. Another possible role a car could have is in the opening parts of the story when Ellie, Jesse and Dina work in these patrols in Jackson, but then I think it's more likely they'd use horses. Speaking of horses, they were the only quote-unquote vehicle that we could actually use and steer ourselves in part 1. That and the fact that we know 100% for sure that the people in Jackson use horses, I think is a giveaway we'll get to use them again in part 2. But who knows? The Last of Us Part 2 is supposed to be a risk-taking game, so... Then we finally come to boats. The only reason I think this actually could be possible is that we had a pretty large boat section in Uncharted 4. Uncharted 4 overall had a pretty big focus on vehicles, and I imagine Naughty Dog spent a lot of time creating the systems for them, which is why I don't see them just throw that away in part 2. Jackson isn't exactly close to the coast, but Seattle is. A possible role for a boat there could be perhaps to escape from the city via the water or something. Another interesting thing about vehicles in part 2 is how they maybe could be included in the multiplayer. Now, Uncharted 4 and The Lost Legacy didn't have this in their multiplayer, so I imagine it's not that likely in The Last of Us either. The maps would have to be significantly larger, which in turn would mean an increased player count. And I don't really see them doing that, but it's fun to think about. Anyways, that's just what I think. What do you think? Do you think we'll get to use vehicles more in part 2 than in the first game? If so, which vehicles? Tell me in the comments down below and let's discuss it. And until next time, have a great day.